Hi, everybody. I'm Valerie Wolf. I'm the Executive Director of the OCAL Clinic in Hamilton of the South Central region for the province. And I want to welcome you today to our sixth webinar in this series. We didn't know when we started it a year ago, June, that we'd still be running them. So that's pretty sad, but hopefully today, like all the previous ones, will bring some knowledge and insight that will help each of you in your workplaces or with the people that you advise, or your families or your communities, understand the hazards and risks of COVID and the ways that that exposure and transmission and therefore illness and death can be prevented. So we have three speakers with us today, and I'm going to introduce each one of them as we go along, but they are all here, which is great. And I just want to do a little bit of an intro. I won't take up too much time, but just the title of this today's presentation is about Delta being different. And it truly is different in terms of the level of risk, and it's because it's so much more transmissible, so much easier for people to catch it. And I just wanted to take a quick look at some of the data in Canada, for instance. This is the health info base that shows and what the whole country looks like and the relative risk, which I know, Goja, you're going to share more detailed, but I think that the shape of the curves in almost every location, except for when we look to the east and to the north, we can see very clearly the, oops, I changed location, but you can see the upward trajectory, I guess, and it's just at different levels of steepness as we come in the west. And Ontario right now is looking better than it was even a few days ago, but I'm not really sure if that's a data glitch or if it's really happening. But generally, everything is still on the going up. Even Nova Scotia is higher today than it was a few days ago. So, and I also was clicking on our regional risk tool, which we built more than a year ago, and it's still remains a bit hard to see unless you blow it right up. But it does still translate almost all the public health or the Ontario data every day, and creates the level of transmission that's happening in graphic form here, so we can see the patterns of regions relative to their own history as well as relative to each other. So, and we can see Windsor-Essex clearly has had problems in the past. We see the black line in the past, and has been the highest transmission in Ontario for many weeks, but Hamilton is right behind it, and Chatham-Kent is there too. And if we look at the, just the without the graph, today's results, there are 6 regions in what we consider to be the red zone, which was when a year ago we thought if any organization or any region was in the red, there would be a lockdown order, and we are not seeing that anymore. And that's some of our discussion, I guess. And we can see that 18, so that's more than half the public health units in Ontario, are at least in orange level by our estimation of the data. So it's serious, and it's happening. And I commented to Goja yesterday, I don't like the comment about the 4th wave as though it's something happening to us. I prefer the definition I heard from someone yesterday, that it's actually the worst wave, and one of the reasons it's the worst, or we want to maybe prevent it from being the worst in Canada, it has been elsewhere, but is because it's entirely preventable. And some of what we want to talk about today is how we can still make a difference to prevent a transmission, illness, and death in Ontario and across the country. So that's all from me right now. I'm going to take the opportunity to stop sharing and ask Goja to load her slides, and I will, great, and I will introduce her in the process. So Dr. Gosia Gasperowicz is a developmental biologist and a researcher at the Faculty of Nursing at the University of Calgary. She earned her master's at the Intercollegiate Faculty of Biotechnology in Gdansk, Poland. I don't think that's the way they pronounce that. I should ask you. And a PhD in biology at Albert Ludwig University of Freiburg. Dr. Gasperowicz is a co-founder of Zero COVID Canada, a member of COVID is Airborne, and a member of the World Health Network. Since the beginning of the pandemic, Dr. Gasperowicz has been analyzing the dynamics of SARS-CoV-2 spread and communicating this scientific understanding to the public via social and traditional media. She also advocates for better pandemic response policies, for which we are totally in favor. So thank you very much, Gosia, for joining us from Alberta today.
Thank you very much for such a kind introduction, and thank you very much for inviting me to this important webinar. So I would like to, can you see now and I always because sometimes it doesn't work for me.
Yes.
Do they flip the slides?
Yes, it looks fine.
Awesome, thank you. So Delta is different, but also it has the same basic properties as COVID from the start, like its original variant. And so what is important about it is that COVID is spreading, the phenomenon it's like other biological phenomena. It has this property like melanoma cancer, mice infestation, or wildfire. So that means that if you have just a little bit of it present, you're still in danger. Because if you have a melanoma cancer, if you have 5 melanoma moles, you remove 3 of them and leave just 2, you're still in danger of fast spreading cancer. And it's exactly like this with COVID. If you have a starter, it will grow. So that's the illustrations from the very old, mild COVID, the first strain we had. It's from Alberta, our first wave. That was nicely quenched because of the shutdown we had, but we reopened too early. We reopened when we have the starter present, so we had 10 daily cases, and almost immediately it started to grow. It was growing through the whole last summer, that's summer 2020, doubling every 60 days. It was exponential growth, but slow exponential growth. And then schools reopened without protective measures on September 1st. 2 weeks later, or 2.5 weeks later, the growth switched into much faster exponential growth, doubling every 2.5 weeks. So that was our second wave, the second wave was absolutely preventable. And here I'd like to compare countries. So Atlantic Canada is still, fortunately, although I don't know about Nova Scotia, following elimination strategy, while the 6 other provinces, Alberta, BC, Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec, and Saskatchewan, are following mitigation strategy. And we see the big differences there. So Atlantic Canada, what is elimination strategy? It's getting all the cases down to 0, so stopping all community transmission, and then gradually reopening, maybe even forming a bubble with other areas that follow also elimination strategy and have zero community spread. And then whenever from imported cases some outbreaks appear, they are stamped out. So Atlantic Canada, each province imposed in March 2020 travel control. So incoming travelers had to quarantine for 2 weeks. And they kept it, and they kept this measure almost all the time. And it was the most important measure. The other one was to bring cases to 0, to not have a local starter of cases. So in cases, we can see that dramatic difference. So the colorful lines are Atlantic Canada cases, and these big gray ones are 6 other provinces that basically failed the response and were riding the waves and on a roller coaster all the time. Then that's hospitalizations per 100,000. So all those graphs are adjusted for population. So hospitalizations are even more dramatic in the provinces that follow mitigation and not elimination strategy. And here are deaths, so that's the most heartbreaking one. And still, we have much, much higher death rate in the 6 COVID provinces than in Atlantic Canada. And okay, that is a comparison of it's a publication graph from publication from Lancet. They compared OECD countries that followed mitigation or elimination versus elimination strategy, and the result is that elimination is the best has the best outcomes for health, economy, and civil liberties. So here we see that death rate in countries that aimed for elimination of COVID. GDP is also better, economy is also better in countries that followed elimination. And also what is, for some people, counterintuitive is that civil liberties and freedoms are higher in elimination countries. So that's the comparing of strictness of lockdown. So countries that follow elimination strategy overall had lower strictness of lockdown. That's my frustrating graph. It's still not delta yet. That's the projection I made in May, showing how fast Alberta could get to zero, could stop the community transmission. We had, with the public health measures and in-person schools being closed at this moment, so May 7th, our cases were going down super fast. Like the R value was 0.66. That was the slowest R value we ever had. And halving time was like 6 days. So if we would just keep these measures for 8 weeks longer, we could stop community transmission in Alberta. And yeah, and probably it would be even faster because I didn't include here the vaccination rate, and we've been still ongoing vaccinating with a lot of people with second doses. So probably we would reach this zero community transmission even faster, and then we could reopen and get normalcy back. But it didn't happen because we had just 5 weeks of school here till summer holidays. Yet we reopened. At the moment we reopened in-person schools, our value both for Delta and original variant increased by 20%. And then we started this big open for summer reopening that totally counteracted our vaccination effort. So I'm sorry, this graph is quite packed, and I did it, and also it should be Delta, but I did it when Delta was not called Delta yet. It was B1617. And I just want to show how predictable the fourth and this worst wave was. Already in May, just knowing that we have couple cases of Delta in community and knowing that Delta could be 40% more transmissible than Alpha, I could make this projection that if we just slightly reopen when original variant would be going down, then Delta would be going up, and we will have this wave in September. And okay, so my method is extrapolation, by knowing the parameters. People who do statistical modeling, like COVID-19 modeling group in BC, came with exactly the same results, that we will have, if we reopen too fast, we will have the quite dramatic wave in fall. And also my frustrating graph that I showed before, that we can get to zero, they also showed that if we reopen gradually, we wouldn't have the fourth wave. And they published the results on May 31st. So that's how predictable and preventable this wave is. And there was a lot of talking about the Delta, about that with vaccination, the cases are decoupled from severe outcomes, so from hospitalizations and ICUs. And it totally wasn't true. It wasn't true for UK. In UK, they were coupled, they were correlated, just the relationship was different. So there was 4 times less hospitalizations per cases than in previous waves, but still 4 times less means just 2 doubling times to reach the same amount. In Israel, it was like 3 times less. In Alberta, the proportion is the same as in previous wave, and even a little bit higher. So we can see, so it's logarithmic, natural logarithm scale graph. So on the y-axis, you see multiplication of 2, so 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, and so on. And on such scale, I really like the scale because then you can see if the decline or growth is really exponential. So whatever forms a straight line on the scale means that is exponential. So in Alberta, we have exponential growth of cases, exponential growth of hospitalizations, and exponential growth of ICUs. And the growth of ICUs and hospitalizations is much faster than it was in previous waves now. So it was doubling in the third wave, it was doubling every 3 weeks. Now it's doubling in less than 2 weeks. So it's worse. Okay, so I would like now to talk about vaccination and relationship between vaccinations, public health measures, and the speed of the spread. So one important parameter to understand is R0 and R, so reproductive value. R0 tells us how many people will one infected person will infect on average when we don't have any public health measures, everybody and no vaccinations, and everybody is susceptible. So basically, how many people one person would infect if we would be in 2018 now. So no vaccines, no public health measures, everybody is susceptible. So the original strain that we had here in Canada had R0 of 3. Then Alpha, so UK variant, had R0 of 4 to 5, and Delta has 5 to 8. So basically it's 2 times more transmissible than original variant that came to Canada. And it has high implications, as we can see. So, okay, that's borrowed graph from BBC, and they have it from Imperial College and the Australian government. So instead of infecting 3 people, 1 person can infect 6 people. So this graph shows how much it is possible to vaccinate ourselves out of the pandemic. On the y-axis, we have daily new cases. Sorry, it shouldn't say variant here. Here is time. And that's the graph for original strain with R0 that equals 3. If we would use vaccines, if we would vaccinate 75% of total population and have 93% vaccine efficiency against transmission, then we could bring the R value from 3 to 0.9, so just below 1, which would bring cases down, but very slowly. So being just below 1 is good, but it's not extremely good. So basically, even with original strain, it was barely possible to reach the herd immunity and vaccinate ourselves out of the pandemic without using public health measures. So a lot of people would need to be vaccinated, and vaccine would need to be very, very efficient against transmission. But what happened then with the original strain, and actually it's real, the blue line is real measures. When we used public health measures, we were able to bring R value much below 0.9. Australia brought it to 0.4. Sorry, New Zealand brought it to 0.5. Austria to 0.5. Australia to 0.6, we had in Alberta 0.7. And it was without vaccines, it was only using public health measures. And if we kept them long enough, then from 100 daily new cases, we could stop community transmission in just 37 days. But in most jurisdictions, we opened somewhere here and started the spread again. So all the jurisdictions that waited long enough with the measures were successful, like Atlantic Canada or New Zealand. And if a year ago we would have such vaccines and add them to public health measures, we could finish pandemic basically in 2 weeks. But what happens now with Delta? So Delta is twice more transmissible than original strain, so R06. Again, the pink line is the vaccination with lower efficacy. So if we have 64% total population vaccinated, which we didn't reach yet in Alberta, and assuming the vaccine efficiency could be like 60%, we don't know what vaccine efficiency against transmission is, but it's not 95% because the efficiency is winning, and also it's not sterilizing vaccine. So then we would still have, even vaccinating so much population with such vaccine efficiency, we would have strong exponential growth. With public health measures only, so the ones that resulted in 0.6, R value 0.6, times 2 is 1.2, we still would have exponential growth. But if we now combine public health measures and vaccines, we can bend the Delta curve and get to R value 0.7. So it's still possible to bend Delta wave. If R0 would be 8 with more transmissible variant, even combination of public health measures with vaccines would not bend the curve. So we would need stronger public health measures or more vaccinations or booster shots and so on to be able to bend the curve. But it's still possible to bend the curve. It's just difficult. Okay, one more thing here. I modeled what would happen if we have, like, vaccinate more people. So if we have 60% vaccine efficiency and we really focus to move to vaccinate more people from 64% to 85% to total population vaccinated, which is basically everybody eligible. If we don't have public health measures, we still have exponential growth then. So it just gives us this advantage, this little advantage. But while adding public health measures to vaccines can bend the curve. So, okay, and here is the real life example that Delta is still crashable. So New Zealand is super well crashing the wave. They started the lockdown on August 16th, I think. I just checked it from the graph, so not from the news, so I'm not super sure of this date. They have only 29% of population fully vaccinated, but with decisive public health measures, they managed to bend the curve, and now they have very steep exponential decline. So they have halving time now is 4 days. So it is possible to crash this curve, but we need to want to do it. And here I compare Canada Delta wave or worst wave with New Zealand Delta wave. So New Zealand 29% total population vaccinated, Canada 68%, but we don't have very efficient use of public health measures, so we are not bending our curve yet. We need to do more. And we are much better placed in terms of vaccination. So we probably need less stringent lockdown than New Zealand has to achieve the same rate of decrease, but we just need to do it. And here I compare the same graph, different scale, because Israel has so many cases. So to compare Israel, Canada, and New Zealand Delta wave. So basically what not to do. Israel heavily relied on vaccination only. They had some public health measures, but not efficient enough. They eventually bent the curve, but at a very high human cost for that, like a lot of sick people, a lot of dead people, and they still stick only to the vaccine. So I would really wish that Canada doesn't repeat what Israel does. Now they are vaccinated. Now they are giving people booster shots, third doses. Probably that's what works. Probably also that so many people get infected that this infection-acquired immunity kicks in here too. But it's definitely not achieving such level of infection is really not a good way to go. I would rather that we be like New Zealand. And also New Zealand and strictest. So that's why I use the word on the previous slide, efficient use of public health measures. So it's not that they are extremely strong. They are, in a short time, they are very strong, but in the rest of time, they are not that strong. So that's the comparison of stringency index, stringency of measures in Canada versus in New Zealand. So the lower is better, lower is more freedom, more normalcy. So basically what happens in New Zealand is that in their first lockdown, they had less liberties than we had in Canada, but then very quickly they had this long stretches of almost normal life, which we didn't have since like 1.5 years in Canada. So now New Zealand is crashing the Delta wave. So again, since several weeks, they have harder restrictions than we have in Canada, but they are going down, and soon they will have the normalcy back again. What they have more strict than we have is quarantine of incoming travelers. But that's something that like we don't travel that often. Like we meet with our friends. Like I would like to be able to meet, like in New Zealand, people can do without a risk for long stretches of time. They can meet with their friends. They can meet for Christmas with their extended family, which we were not able to do in Canada. So, and traveling abroad is maybe like, I don't know, one can travel like 3 times a year, while meeting with friends and meeting with grandparents is something one would like to do every week. So that's the freedoms people in elimination strategy countries have, which we don't have. Well, we have freedom to travel abroad without quarantine, but yeah. So how to achieve the elimination? So first thing is, it's very important to have the explicit goal that we are going for elimination. We want to stop the community transmission, and then we can use all the tools we have in the toolbox to do it. So mandatory quarantine of international and interregional travelers, temporary shutting down of all non-essential activities, including in-person schools, with exceptions for people that really need it. Really, that's important, to have strong financial support for businesses and individuals. And of course, preventing airborne SARS-CoV-2 transmission. So using as strong masks as possible, improving ventilation and air filtration, and using CO2 meters, aggressive testing, tracing, and isolating, strategic vaccination. So vaccinating essential workers and people in high incidence areas first, because that works to slow down the spread. And once there's no new community cases, so once the community transmission stopped in given region, this region can make a bubble with another regions that also stopped community transmission and reopen safely. Thank you very much. And I can take questions.
That's great. Thank you very much, Gosia. Very informative and very interesting to see, although depressing to see Canada getting compared to New Zealand, of course, but to see the difference that public health measures can make. And that's what we're still struggling to get the point across, that vaccination is not enough. It will not be enough by itself now. I don't know if you already showed that in your slide, but I don't know if you wanted to comment. That is certainly the only word that gets used out of the political leaders or anyone else's mouth is vaccination. So I don't know if you want to add.
Yes, we are not with variants more transmissible, much more transmissible than original variant, with high R0, high transmissibility. It's just not possible to vaccinate ourselves out, because the vaccines are not sterilizing. Maybe once we have the nasal vaccines that give sterilizing immunity, then yes, we can stop the spread with them. But like this, we will have the spread all the time. And the problem is that, so if vaccine is 60 to 90% efficient against transmission, overall transmission. And let's say that delta R0 is between 6 and 8, then we would need to vaccinate between 92% to 146% of total population to achieve herd immunity. Like, we cannot vaccinate 140% of people. It's just no. So this is out. So vaccines protect people from severe outcomes, but they cannot stop the pandemic right now. And the other thing that is very important, that virus mutates. If it would be stable like it is, and we know that it won't be any more severe, aggressive than it is, but it mutates. So it evolves, and we train it, like by letting it spread in high levels among vaccinated people. We train it to evade the vaccination, so evade our immune system, to generate more, to basically make we train it so to be more evasive against immunity, which means that our vaccines will become less effective for this virus. So it's a very dangerous attitude to do that.
Thanks.
Yeah.
A couple other questions. I'll skip mine actually right now, but Trevor asks, what is the definition or the difference between efficient versus inefficient use of public health measures?
So efficient public health measures are the ones that reduce the spread, and so efficient are the ones that reduce the spread, and they reduce spread fast, and then allow for reopening and functioning of the society the longest time possible. So that's why New Zealand used it efficiently, so didn't waste what they gained. Every time we use our measures, first of all, we use just half of them usually. Like, we don't use, for example, not using the anti-airborne transmission measures.
Right.
If we would use them and add them to the cocktail of measures that we have, then we could reduce the spread much faster and get back to normalcy. But because we use just something, so we make a shutdown, but we don't acknowledge airborne transmission. So it's like using just half of your tools when you build something. You don't build the house quickly if you use just half of the tools. And for example, if you finish your roof, you use holes, you leave some holes in it, then it's also an efficient use of your tools.
Okay, thanks.
So I don't know, I was clear probably.
Another question, which to some extent might be rhetorical, but it's a good question to ask. With evidence of elimination strategies, why are the medical officers of health in jurisdictions not pushing their regions and premiers to go that way?
That's a tough question, because it's so difficult to understand what is the reason for that, and at the same time, I witness in my conversations I have with scientists from all over and doctors from all over the world, witnessing what is happening in Australia, what messaging is in UK. There is such a big push for infecting as many people as possible. And I cannot understand why, and I cannot understand what for, but the push is there, and it's by ignoring active ignoring spread in school, active ignoring that COVID is airborne. So
yeah, it's an acceptance of a level of risk, right?
Yeah, and accepting that people get infected,
and children especially, right?
Yeah, so that there was a lot of messaging last spring, like spring 2020 and summer 2020, and it still continues, this messaging that it's not very harmful for children to get COVID, which is not true, because like between 3 to 12% of kids that get infected can develop long COVID, so it's not benign, and and it's the virus that can get into the nervous system and stay there. And we don't know what are long-term consequences. Well, what will happen with people who get infected now? What will happen 30 years from now or 50 years from now? So accepting that people are infected with unknown pathogen that we don't fully know what the consequences are is unacceptable. And especially the more we know about it, the more we are sure that it's a dangerous virus, a very dangerous virus.
Can I ask a question, Val? I've got a burning question, and it's kind of a paper that I've read recently, and I put a link. It's actually not a peer-reviewed paper, but it's a paper out of Israel, talking about the lessening of the efficacy of the vaccine, and it's implying that after 6 months, it's not that efficient at all. This is a study on the mRNA Pfizer vaccine. I'm just wondering, do you want to comment on that? Have you read that study at all?
Yes, I've read about those studies. So there were several ones already, like showing that the vaccines are less, like that the efficacy is waning over time. So absolutely, it is a concern that it doesn't stay the same, and we would need booster shots basically every 6 months probably to keep on top of it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There's a couple of questions more that we'll take now, and then maybe we'll save some of them till the end, at the end. But so one question that I think maybe piqued other people's interest as well is around your comment about vaccines, sterilizing vaccines. So is there a way to make vaccines sterilizing is the question.
Yes, so the vaccines that are nasal vaccines, they have better sterilizing abilities, because, okay, I'm not immunologist, so I don't know exactly what the mechanism there is, but it's that the response that's happening in the nose is more naive, sort of. And when you train your cells in the nose, like immune cells in the nose, to recognize the pathogen, it's preventing it from going deeper into your body. So basically you don't get infected and then you don't spread it. While intramuscular vaccines don't give this the sterilizing, so that's why people can still get infected and spread the virus, the people who are vaccinated. But yes, it's possible to generate those sterilizing vaccines when we have this intranasal, like, I don't know exactly how you give them to people, but and that's something I don't understand. Why don't we push more? Like, why don't we have them yet?
Yeah,
because
we'll have to get another
it's just the mode of delivery. So
yeah, we'll get a vaccinologist or someone to come back maybe and talk to us about that, the possibility of something like that on the horizon. But